Hi, I'm Emilie for this special edition of Taking the Pulse. Last March, 300 young people from around the world gathered in Rome for a pre-synodal meeting on young people, the faith, and vocational discernment. They were given the task of helping the bishops prepare for their upcoming synod on the same theme next October. 26 language groups in total, 20 in Rome and 6 online, had 2 full days to discuss 15 questions divided into 3 parts on the challenges and opportunities of young people today, on faith and vocation, and on the pastoral activity of the church. The results were synthesized into one final document written by a core group of delegates present at the meeting in Rome, reviewed by their peers, and then presented to the Pope. As the delegates indicated, this document should be read as a compass pointing towards a clearer understanding of where young people are at today. However, this approximately 15-page text has received a lot of criticism. Now I get to sit down with Sebastian Gomes and Allyson Kenny, 2 of our Salt and Light producers, to talk about it and to share with you what we think are some keys to understanding this document. Sebastian, Allyson, thank you for being here today. Now, I was at the Pre-Synod. I was even part of the working group on the final document. So before I give my opinion on it, I'm going to ask you first, what are your first impressions after reading the final document?
So I thought it was very broad, but given that the young people were asked to summarize what all young people around the world are thinking and feeling, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I felt like the treatment of issues and different topics was pretty balanced. It acknowledged that there is ambiguity among young people and that there's no real consensus on a lot of things. And there are certain themes that I'm sure we can talk about later, but yes, it's a very broad in terms of what's covered, and rightly so. There's a lot that we need to talk about in the church. What also really, going back to the document in the past couple of weeks, struck me was the link with Gaudete et Exsultate. Now, the Pre-Synod started on March 19th, I believe, and that was the day that the Pope actually signed Gaudete et Exsultate. So there was no cross-referencing between them. He couldn't have been influenced by this document. But the idea that holiness is something that isn't as relevant for people nowadays, especially for young people, comes out in this document and in Gaudete et Exsultate. So I thought that was a really neat kind of link there.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I thought it was a bit all over the place. I mean, I could see that you know, you only had a week to kind of work on it, right? And you were trying to collect as many of the different ideas that were expressed by the people who were there and then the people who were online. But the thing that jumped out at me right away, and Allyson kind of alluded to it, there was a real kind of honesty about it. That I really appreciated. You know, I think that the young people who were there didn't seem like they were afraid to say what they really thought about the current state of things. And that's really what the point of this was. Like, this isn't some, you know, revelation from God, like, that's going to be inserted into the New Testament canon. Like, it's like what the show is taking the pulse. It's a snapshot of where young people are at today, what they think about the faith, what they think about the church, what they think about the church's teachings, what they think about parish life, all these things. And so it was a little bit chaotic, covered a lot of ground, but I thought it was really honest, and I appreciated that.
It is an impressive document, and honesty, which is something that Pope Francis asked for at the beginning of the week, and I do feel like the young people really gave their honest opinions on things. And so, didn't want to sugarcoat it. However, coming out of the synod, of the pre-synod, you know, we're now over a month now away from that event. There's been a lot of criticism around this final document. It's not this magisterial document, right? And so it is young people giving their impressions on where they're at today. So what makes this so controversial?
Well, it depends on who you speak to. I mean, there's a relatively small but vocal group of Catholics around the world, but especially in North America, who are unsettled by having an open conversation about issues that they think are completely closed. And that's not the Orthodox tradition. That's never been the Orthodox tradition, to just not talk about things. I mean, there has to be discussion, there has to be discernment, there has to be a kind of progress. We believe in the development of doctrine. That is a legitimate thing. That is not something that's foreign to our tradition or foreign to the gospel. So, you know, you have people who like very particular things, wanted things asserted more clearly that weren't. Like, my understanding of reading all the reaction was, especially the people who like the traditional liturgy, the extraordinary form Mass, were not happy that extraordinary form Mass was absent from, in terms of wording, from the final document, because they felt that there was at least enough reference to it from the online contributions through the Facebook during the Pre-Synod, that it warranted inclusion. And I mean, I didn't think that it was absent because, like, they do mention, I think you guys mentioned at the end.
It is mentioned.
You know, there are people in this group and around the world, and young people in the church who do tend to gravitate toward the more traditional liturgies, and that's totally fine. So I thought it was a little bit of an overreaction, but I think what you're seeing there is people who are approaching the faith in a very closed kind of way. I mean, like, the faith is this thing and it never changes and it's only this, and anybody who's talking about anything other than that is wrong and it's an error and all this stuff. And so they're totally closed to this Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit blows where he wills. It's straight from Scripture, and Francis encourages that. So it's, you know, I think it should be inclusive. I thought it was inclusive, and I thought it was a little bit of a stretch to be blaming this document, as we said, that was just a snapshot and not anything kind of magisterial, for leaving out something like that.
And I think it's helpful to acknowledge that the document actually does make reference to the fact that, you know, there is beauty and value to be found within tradition. However, that some young people also feel that they're stifled or totally disengaged from the idea of, or ways of doing and being that have always been in place. So again, it goes back to the idea that this document has a balance. So when people criticize the fact that, oh, well, X, Y, Z that's more traditional wasn't included, reading the document, actually going in and reading it, that's not the case at all. At least that's not how I see it. So I think that criticism is unfounded.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not, and like you said, it's not the only place, like the extraordinary form reference is not the only thing that there was like a nice balance, you know, speaking about. I mean, there was reference, I think, to how in certain parts of the world, people do feel really close to the church. They do feel like the local community, like the parish, is like fantastic, and it like meets all their needs and that kind of thing. So there was a real acknowledgement of like, here are the things that are kind of working in some areas, here are the things, here's what other people think. I mean, I thought it was very balanced.
Allyson, you prepared for us a beautiful word cloud, and I thought it worthwhile to show it here.
This was done in the Salt and Light Arts and Crafts Hour. It's a new program that we'll be on.
Exactly. But essentially, this at least represents some of the words that come out most often throughout the document,
so
right?
For me, it was helpful to have a visual representation of the types of things young people were talking about, or the themes that were emerging, given the fact that the document has such a breadth of content. And one thing that really struck me, which may have not been apparent on first reading, was that Jesus and Christ are the two words that stood out for me too. So it really is a Christ-centric document, and young people talk about the model of Christ and sharing who Jesus is and what he came to do for us being the way forward. So the document really is, it's centered in strong Catholic teaching and a Catholic understanding of the faith.
You mentioned his document on holiness that came out, and how there was, you know, some, it resonated with some of the things that the young people said in the document. There are certain things that are very Francis that, you know, we've heard him say, and we could really quote him verbatim in any conversation. And so these come out in the document, but what, you know, can we then take the delegates seriously if it just seems like they're copying Pope Francis? You know, how can we take them seriously, or how should we read this document then?
And there have been, you know, comments or criticisms that use the term ventriloquism, you know, as if young people leaning on the Pope's thought is something bad. My counter, my counter argument to that, 2 points. One is that one of the beauties of the living tradition of the Church is that we have the Pope to be a figurehead who is supposed to unite us. I know that our Pope right now can be controversial for some people we talked about previously who take this more traditionalist mindset and see him in opposition to that. But I'm a convert to the Catholic Church. One thing that I find incredibly convicting and that really is helpful, and one of the reasons why I converted to the Church, was that consensus of opinion that's embodied in this figure that we believe is elected through the influence of the Holy Spirit. So if Francis is our Pope, he is, the Spirit is helping to show us the signs of the times through what he does and says. And so young people picking up on what he says, I don't think is a bad thing at all. I think that's Spirit influenced. And the second is that Francis is the first Pope that we've had from the modern church era. I would say, or the first Pope formed by the modern church era. So after the Second Vatican Council, there then was this idea that the church needs to grapple with the things of this world and not just be shooting for heaven. We're here to help make a difference on this earth, and that will lead us towards holiness and bringing about the kingdom. So I believe that his way of speaking and talking that comes out in this document is very reflective of where the universal church is at. So to me, it's almost nonsensical to say, oh, well, young people are quoting the Pope. Well, the Pope is speaking to the heart of of the world and where people are at. And maybe some of our viewers will disagree, but I don't think you can refute the fact that this is the direction the church is going.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Allyson, and I would just add that this concept is not new. I mean, just because Francis is the Pope and this group of young people was kind of taking his lead, his encouragement seriously, and then trying to kind of discern what is the Spirit saying through him, what does that mean for the church, and trying to incorporate into their reflections and their discernments is not new. I mean, if Benedict was Pope, they'd be doing the exact same thing. Whatever Benedict said at the opening, session that he had when all of you were there, somebody would have quoted something that he had said in that talk, right? So it's just, this is a Catholic thing that we do. So it's important to recognize, like it's a good question, because we got to recognize that there are some things in there that I could see verbatim are like totally from Francis.
Of course.
But it's not something, again, worth criticizing, because it's just part of kind of who we are and what we do, and we trust, as Allyson said, the Holy Spirit's working through it.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it is a very Pope Francis era document.
Right.
And I think that, as you both said, it is a natural thing.
And Francis is also like freed people to say things that they might not have been comfortable saying before. So that is kind of new with Francis, So maybe we are kind of seeing people follow his lead, but it's because all of a sudden we have a Pope who speaks so plainly and so practically that touches, as you said, so many people's lives that they're like, he actually is saying what I've always thought.
Technology was another hot topic in the document, and young people were, quick to mention, of course, the vices or the challenges that technology pose, the use of social media, and we all know this. I think that because social media and technology is just part of daily life, we're not going to get rid of it. We know what the challenges are. We do know what the good impact that it can have as well. It was one of the only areas in the document as well where young people are making a concrete proposal to the church and saying, we actually want to see an official teaching on this, on the use of technology and social media. Can the church actually do that? Can the church propose, help young people in that area?
And that's a question that I don't think, I'm a professional communicator, I'm a Catholic, I don't think I have an answer to that. That surprised me. And again, as a professional communicator, I'm not really sure why it surprised me. Maybe I didn't expect young people to be having the same kind of thoughts or be on the same wavelength as I am about things. They mention things like that the church, the internet offers the church an unprecedented evangelical opportunity. I think that's a very interesting point. I don't think that the church exploits that as strongly as it could, and as to whether the church could really speak to technology. I mean, we live an incarnational faith. We live a faith that the whole idea of our faith is that it should imbue every aspect of our life. I'm sure the church must have something to say about technology. I would like to read that. I just have to say, good luck to those who do write it, because I don't know what that would look like.
Yeah.
And is that a flaw of the institutional church, or is that the church's inability to speak to our times? I don't know.
I mean, the call to action, you know, from the youth to the church, which we have to presume is the bishops, you know, the teachers, the guarantors of unity and everything, the leaders of the church. It's bold. I'm not sure what they would say, apart from just general guidelines about how to, like, you know, how to approach your involvement with it. You know, I think it would be a little bit of a removed level. I think of the same thing as like a voting guide. Like the bishops will never tell you how to vote, or at least they shouldn't. But they will tell you, like, here are the things to consider when you're voting. How to inform your conscience about voting. And I think it's the same kind of thing with the engagement with media. How do you inform your engagement? How do you make sure that it's helpful? How do you know to recognize the signs of when it's becoming a little bit unhealthy, like you're there too much, or you're being involved in these like very negative, like trolling and stuff like that. I mean, it's that kind of stuff, like how are you demonizing other people? How are you creating disunity as opposed to unity? All those kinds of things that are like the deeper reflective part of the engagement, I think the bishops could offer something on, and probably should. And it would, I think, look something like that.
Okay, we need to move on to our final topic now. So we were talking at the beginning how in this word cloud we see the word women being, again, a very recurring word in the document. Now there's been criticism saying that, you know, is this document promoting ordination to the priesthood for women, or is it not? It doesn't state anything clearly. It does talk about, you know, how can women have greater leadership roles in the church. Anyways, but I leave it to you. Is it promoting that, or is it not?
So I feel like that line of thinking is kind of laughable, given that there's literally nothing in the document that talks about the ordination to the priesthood and women in the same kind of context. It's a document that is about, you know, the synod's going to be about the discernment of vocation and young people in this world. Interestingly, though, the document mentions women 16 times, which is as many as the number of times that vocation are used. So young people clearly feel very strongly that the role of women in the church should be acknowledged, uplifted, and strengthened. Now, I mean, we've talked about this. We were discussing, is talking about the role of women as a concept in general demeaning towards women? Is it implying that there's this inequality? To me, I don't see it that way. I see it that for so long the church has been an institution that has been male dominated, that if we don't have these discussions, where do women fit in the agenda? I read a statistic recently that says something along the lines of women do 75% of the work of the church in a lay context, invisible, behind the scenes. Salt and Light just put out a documentary called A Woman's Voice, where we see women at all different levels and ages and stages within their faith and within the church. And that it really seems that it's time, you know, it's time that women come to the forefront of discussion in the church and have a stronger voice. So I see parallels between the way that women are being discussed in this document and the fact that young people are being consulted. Clearly, many of the people who were involved in the synod were young women, and I think we have every right to have a voice. Does that mean that this document is then saying just because women should have a greater role and voice that they should be priests? That to me is, where did that come from? That's super out of left field for me and how I've read this document, and I think how most rational and mainline Catholics would read it as well.
Yeah, I think the word that some people got hung up on was equality. There was an acknowledgement that men and women in society and in the church today are unequal. And so even though there was no explicit reference to ordination, I think that was the word that people read into, you know. The deeper problem, and this is again kind of with the stuff we were talking about before with people who were highly critical of this whole process and the document, there was this assumption that there was like a lobby going on. Like I was at the Synod on the New Evangelization. I was at both synods on the family, inside watching the discussions every single day and talking to bishops every single day. And the same accusation was made. There's this strong lobby to get, you know, everybody to just tear down the moral fabric of the church, the teachings of the church, and let relativism go crazy.
Right.
And I was like, where are you getting this from? Like, this is just not a. They're not grounding their observations in reality. So that's that issue. Regarding women, it was amazing how often women came up in this document, and it's not in one section. You know, the final document was written in 3 sections. As you know, you were writing for one section. It's like the recurring theme throughout the entire document. Women, 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 women. So there's no question that that a deeper reflection has to go on, and there's no question that there is not enough women's voices at the highest levels of the church. And that's not saying women need to be priests or bishops or whatever. It's just that the way the authoritative structure of the church is created, the hierarchy is created, it not only, it also excludes lay men. You know, like if you look at like what is the image of the church, you got popes, you got cardinals, you got archbishops, you got bishops, you got priests, you got monsignors, you got deacons, and then it's all the rest of us little lay people, you know, scurrying around St. Peter's Square. I mean, there needs to be some kind of reflection on this. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think women's ordination is on the table. I think Francis has made that very clear, but it's certainly worth talking about. If we care about evangelization and the gospel, you got to talk about that.
Now, what do you think, you know, quickly, some of the topics that you wish you would have seen in the document, or that are mentioned in the document, but maybe just not mentioned enough?
I think we both agreed that the environment, the issue of the environment was really not as prominent as we thought, especially given that, you know, Pope Francis's last encyclical was Laudato Si, which is on care of our common home, you know, environmental issues linking with social issues. That one was very surprising for me. I would say that really was the one that was top of mind.
Yeah. There was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 references to the environment, to ecology, but it was kind of peripheral. It was kind of an afterthought, you know. It was, let's say this statement, and then, oh yeah, and also the environment should be considered. And so I just thought it would be, considering that, you know, the next generation, young people are the eco generation, or at least have to be if we're going to survive. That's the impression we have. For them, not for you all, not to have, you know, maybe you didn't discuss it really that much, but I thought it would come out a little bit more. And then the other thing I would add is I know that there were non-Catholics at the Synod, but I didn't feel like there was a place for them really in the document. It was a very Catholic-y document. And remember what Francis said at the vigil, was it last year or the year before, just before Palm Sunday, when he had that meeting in Rome with a whole bunch of young people, and said, I want to listen to you, I want to listen to all of you, even you who are not Catholic, atheists. You have something to say to the Pope, you have something to say to the bishops, you have something to say to the church. And it's not easy to incorporate those voices. Like that's a bridge that needs to be kind of constructed really intentionally by the church, by Catholics. But I thought that I was going to see a little bit more. I mean, here's what the church looks like from the outside.
I was just going to add that I think it would be very difficult to have an articulate conversation about the Catholic Church within the parameters of an event like this for individuals who weren't versed at all in Catholic ways and means of going about doing things. So that you would almost have to give a crash course in, this is how we're going to talk about Catholicism, or this is the framework for how we want this discussion to take place before we could actually have a constructive dialogue. And that is not a criticism of people who are atheists or of other faiths.
Not at all.
That's a criticism of the Catholic way of doing things, I think. and I don't mean that in an incredibly negative light. I think it might come across that way.
Criticism.
But it's a constructive criticism that I believe that dialogue in that area is a way that we need to move forward, and we need to develop a means to do that really enriches both parties.
Right. Now, would you say this was a successful pre-synod? First time, was the first time young people, or the church was inviting young people at a high level to consult them? Do you think it was successful? How can we measure this?
Anytime something new happens in the church is a positive thing, you know. I mean, like, for the most part. So I think, like, just the fact that it kind of happened is a positive step. I think it's a modernizing kind of institutional thing. It's not perfect. There were mistakes. You know better than of the three of us, best of the three of us, how difficult the process was, how logistically it was not the most efficient thing. And that's the same thing with the ordinary synods of bishops too. When they come, they're not the most efficiently operated things either. But it's difficult to like get everybody's input, So it's a process that not only has to continue to unfold, but has to continue to adapt and to change. And that's and Paul VI said that when he started the Synod of Bishops in the 1960s after the council. In the document he wrote, he said the structures, the processes have to be able to adapt to the times and to the way people are having conversations. And so I think it's a very positive thing. It gives me a lot of hope, and I really resonated with a lot of what the young people said in the document. So for that reason, I think, yeah, a very positive step.
My take would be slightly different. My take is that it remains to be seen whether this was a successful effort. I think that the fruits of the synod itself will determine whether consulting youth was lip service or whether this actually brings about concrete action and change in the church.
Of course.
This document was not meant to give an extreme amount of recommendations to the bishop or to give bishops to give like a programmatic statement of this is what we want from you. We talked a little bit about how there was the a request for a document about social media and communications, but I really think that if the ethos of this document is not then incorporated into what the Synod Fathers bring forth, that it's all for naught. So we've talked about things like young people wanting a community to happen, and they want to be included and to have their voices not just be consulted for this document, but to have an ongoing discussion. If things aren't put in place to allow that discussion to continue, then why did we do this to begin with?
And they do make recommendations. Like I think they even suggested maybe there's a pontifical council that's started, or there's some youth that are appointed to a pontifical council. So there's that voice to the Pope directly from young people is kind of institutionalized.
So there are things like that. So there are a few recommendations, and you would hope that then at the synod those are discussed, those are sort of enshrined into action that's going to take place, and that they're amplified. I would love to see that at the parish level, at then the
it's hard
the
enough
diocesan
to establish
level.
a parish council. Let alone do something like that.
See, and yeah, so there are challenges, right? But one can dream. One can dream.
One can always dream. That's right.
Thank you very much, Allyson and Sebastian. I wish that we had more time because it seems like this discussion was very fruitful already. So thanks again. And now you got to hear what we think about the final document. We would also like to hear what you think about it. You can share your thoughts with us via Twitter at @SaltandLightTV or on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook. You can also visit our website, saltandlighttv.org/synod, and the final document is there, so you can go and read that. Thanks a lot for being with us, and we'll see you next time.